What's up? Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. It's Pat, your dear buddy Pat, here to talk about more musical acquisitions in hard format. Listening to this Bloodstains Across Buffalo compilation. If you're not familiar with the Bloodstains comps, there are a lot of rarities and obscure early punk bands compiled due to region. They have ones for like Finland and Texas, and there's dozens of them at this point. The Texas one's great. Lots of good stuff on there, including Bobby Sox and I believe the Stains, the pre-MDC band. But this is the Buffalo one. I bought it because this is my home region of the country, as you're probably aware if you watch the channel. And it's good. You know, it's very much of that early power pop, punk, garagey kind of stuff. They have a real knack for picking out the one banger that these bands all had, and I haven't heard of any of them. There's a band called the Stains, but there's like a bazillion Stains from the early 80s. This is a Buffalo one. There's some pretty rude language for such an early period of music, but I guess that's early punk for you. Yeah, it's a good comp. It's playing in the background. So, got some vinyl I wanted to talk about that I picked up at that flea market that Jason put on. Some hardcore records. So I got some hardcore on vinyl, some hardcore punk on vinyl. And I got some metal on CD that it's just been kind of trickling in the past month or so. We'll talk about that. First up, we have Dmize. Now, I picked this up from a guy named Chris Minicucci, who runs Painkiller Records and also has a hand in Radio Raheem Records. He was running a booth. Mostly, a lot of his stuff was just his label stuff, but he was distroing a few other things. He got copies of this in. This is a Dmize demos collection, demos compilation. Weird European label that neither of us had heard of, this Cupcake label. At that time, a month ago or whenever it was that I picked this up, he was the only distro in the United States that had this, so I'm really glad I ran into him at the flea market. This is classic early 90s stompy metallic hardcore. The bass player is Hoya from Madball, and it's just a perfect example of New York hardcore at that time. Weird amalgamation of graffiti culture, skinhead culture, thrown together with some really intense metal riffing, but doing its own thing with it, doing something else completely different rhythmically with those style of riffs that's basically butchered and fragmented thrash metal and death metal riffs translated into a different sort of thing that was very unique to only New York hardcore at that time. If you want to talk about like Breakdown being the originators of that, Mike DeJean, that guitarist, you know, of course, Matt Henderson from Madball and Agnostic Front doing this sort of chunky riffing, very hard. 3 great demos. At certain points, I think it's the last demo on here that came out in '92. They get almost like Slayer worshipping with the riff style, which is great. You know, suitably tough kind of vocal style. It's just really catchy stuff. It's very like, you know, it's got that jazzy syncopated kind of rhythmic side to it. A little bit of the quote unquote old school or 80s hardcore style rhythms on it too, kind of fast at points, but a little bit of intricate melodic kind of thing going on, like Burn and Beyond and bands like that we're doing at the time. But highly recommended to check out. Great like raw guitar tone. Sounds like some kind of Metal Zone pedal was maybe involved, and maybe not the biggest or best amp, but it just works for the just desperate raw kind of street level sound and vibe of this whole thing. Everything on this was produced by Don Fury, who was you know, if you know anything about old New York hardcore stuff, was the primo guy to go to at that time. But yeah, highly recommended. All these will have links so you can check it out for yourself if you're into that sort of thing. Next up, we got a couple of records by Arms Race. This is came out on Painkiller 2 years ago. This is the new wave of British hardcore. This is a great band. This new wave of British hardcore scene or movement has been gaining steam the past 3-4 years or so. Primarily bands that are take equal inspiration from 80s stuff from their home country of Britain and combine it with that kind of raw, ugly 80s hardcore style, particularly anything with negative as a prefix, negative effects, negative approach, the State, you know, United Blood era, Agnostic Front. There's a bunch of bands in this little clique of people, and they're all really, really good. Violent Reaction being probably the most popular. As far as I know, unfortunately, they called it a day, but they did a record on Revelation 2 years ago, maybe? I think? 2 years ago. Literally flying the flag of New Wave of British Hardcore there. This band, well, it's interesting, because if you consider how influences go back and forth between countries over decades, if you consider that Negative Approach, Negative Effects, SSD, bands like that took a lot of influence from British bands, particularly Oi bands like Foreskins, Blitz, and especially Discharge, you know, being a massively influential hardcore band. It's kind of interesting to hear things go back and forth, because this band's taking a lot of inspiration from Oi and Oi-inspired American hardcore bands. So the vocals are really, really deep, really growly. You know, you could say they're almost bordering on something more brutal. You know, there's equal parts Hodges from the Foreskins and whoever does the deep vocals for ENT. Is it Phil Vane? One of those guys. I don't know if that's intentional, but the vocals are so brutal and so deep. Short songs, of course. A good mix of like a lot of like kind of upbeat, almost pogo-ish rhythms, and they bust into that kind of American style Tom Bust, creepy crawl kind of thing. Everything, the vocals and the drums in particular are very reverby. It's this very echoey 80s sort of production. It's just this, you feel completely surrounded, you know, it's like you're in one of those subways, British subways, the ones that go under the tunnels. That's what it sounds like, and it's great. This also came out, I think, on Quality Control HQ, which is the epicenter for all this British hardcore stuff. But there are some great bands and definitely worth checking out, the biggest of them being the aforementioned Violent Reaction and the Flex. These guys, I think, have members of both, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be. There's a lot to dig into, but if you take a look at Quality Control, I'll put the link. There's a lot of great hardcore coming out of that country. Payday was another one that I heard recently. They were kind of more of an early Integrity, Confront style, mean Clevo hardcore kind of band from Britain. So that's great. I also got the brand new Arms Race, the 7-inch that just came out. The Beast EP. This came out on Painkiller. Both of these are probably pressed on Quality Control Quality Control HQ. I'm thinking, but I'm not sure. They definitely sell this stuff too. But at any rate, more great stuff from this band. Production's a little less noisy and reverby. It's a little bit more straightforward, but the style's still intact. A little tighter, I think, like a little bit more disparity between slow and fast, but definitely mean as fuck. Meaner than the dog in the Sandlot, tell you what. And then we got this Aggression Pact. This is the second 7-inch by this project with a couple of Boston guys and a dude from originally Virginia or DC. The singer from Wasted Time, with a couple of other guys that have played in a ton of bands in Boston. A lot of members of kind of thing going on here. Drummer Ryan's been in a ton of bands. Most recently Exit Order, and also Social Circle, Blank Stare. A ton of Boston bands, but at any rate, this is more that great, gnarly, raw, fast hardcore that I love. You know, you could definitely point people towards Poison Idea and Negative Approach and stuff like that. Great, deep, growled, sandpapery vocals. If you're familiar with Wasted Time, they were an awesome band. Jason just talked about them recently. Definitely check them out. But if you like your hardcore fucking ugly, full of warts, pissed, occasional cute little solo thrown in there, this is great, great, great stuff on Painkiller. So, Painkiller stuff. Cooch was also selling this. That's his nickname, by the way, Chris Minicucci. Was also selling this Wretched box set, and I've just been diving into this band. I've been aware of their existence since like the late 90s, when I started hearing more and more about hardcore bands or punk bands from other countries. when I traveled to London the first time, I met a bunch of punks from Italy that were all about these guys. And I just showed off their LP a few updates back, maybe about a month ago, something like that. Their LP is fantastic, and I've been digging into it more and more and getting to appreciate it more and more. The thing with Wretched, and this is called Libero El Selvaggio. The thing about Wretched is they, as I mentioned on my previous update, they do have this sort of falling apart nature. It's weird because everybody seems pretty adept at their instruments, relatively speaking, playing well, but everything's not quite in sync. A friend of mine on Instagram said, yeah, they sound like a hardcore band falling down a flight of stairs, which I think is a really apt descriptor. Comes with a nice booklet here. They do, I'll kind of go backwards here, on these 7 inches, they do kind of pull it together and have it really focused and tight on this last one, which came out in 1988, in Contraluce, which all these come on different colors, if you're into that sort of thing. This one's clear. This is only 2 songs. It's basically a single. It's a lot more melodic. Still very hardcore punk. Relatively fast, upbeat stuff, but there's a lot more melody with the bass lines. The guitar's ringing out and the bass doing its own kind of thing, which almost seems like it's leaning a little bit towards like post-punk, but I'm not sure if that's deliberate or they're just getting better at their instruments at this point. From what I read, this was the last thing they did. They have a lot more singles and 7 inches than this. This is only 4 of them collected. I think there's at least 2 or 3 more. Finire Mai. This is a nasty, nasty little 7 inch. This is about as fast and furious as it gets for their material in this box set. But yeah, raw, ugly, fast. You gotta love non-English hardcore vocalists, and especially with, like, I guess what would be considered a Romance language, Italian and Spanish and stuff like that, because they can spit out the words so fast, and it sounds so cool, you know. I've gotten to appreciate hardcore vocalists that do Spanish and Italian and stuff like that a lot more. French works really well with certain genres like Oi. Classic cover art there. This has been used on countless things. I'm sure Carnivore fans recognize that, but World War II era photo. This is, from what I remember, a little less fast and crazy than the last one I showed off, but pretty similar. Yeah, I'm not going to read that off, embarrass myself any further. That's what it's called. So that's cool. And then finally, I believe this was the first thing they recorded. The split with Indigesti. Indigesti side not included. I guess, if they want to keep it exclusively a Wretched box set, but it's kind of weird, because the Indigesti side's really good. But it's a single-sided deal, and that's just in black. So, very, very neat to have, very fun little score there. 7-inch box sets are a little, you know, it's one of those things, I've had them in the past and flipped them. I had one of the Nihilist, all the Nihilist demos, which was really cool to have. But listening to them is such a pain in the ass. I'm sure if you've had experience with that, or you can imagine flipping a 7-inch, flipping a 7-inch. I'm trying to find the time to actually make a tape and put the LP and all of this on one 90-minute cassette, or maybe even 60-minute cassette. It'll probably fit on, because that'd be great to just listen to it uninterrupted. So that's all the hardcore stuff that I've acquired. I got this a while ago. I've been kind of snoozing on updates a little bit. I don't know about you. You know, YouTubers go in these kind of dry spells sometimes, especially when you're getting into, like, you know, a year's time plus of uploading. You know, there's a honeymoon's over kind of deal. Lately I went down on this rabbit hole with the Nintendo games that I got at that last flea market thing I went to, and I've bought a bunch lately and been obsessively binge watching Metal Jesus Rocks. It's kind of interesting to look at these gamer channels and these guys that live off of YouTube. More power to them. It's great, you know. But it just seems, you know, I even the most well-known, successful, quote-unquote, metal YouTubers or record YouTubers usually have, I don't know, 40 to 80,000, and there's guys that talk about video games and do screen grabs of video games that have 500,000 and get to live off of it, which is pretty crazy. Like, good for them again, but anyways, that's never gonna happen to me. and bathroom break slash flipping the record edit there. So some metal CDs. Nothing too crazy in this pile. I just wanted to pick up a few holes in the collection, a few must-haves. This is Ripping Corpse's Dreaming with the Dead. An absolute classic. If you're into 90s death metal, you're probably familiar with it. If you're not, you should be. I have been aware of this and listened to it many times over the years, but I did not own a physical copy. This was in my Amazon cart or want list for like a decade, and it was one of those, like, it's always going to be there kind of deals, and I know sooner or later things just aren't. I don't know how much dead stock that Craze Records had of this, but it seems to be everywhere for about like $10. So I don't know about vinyl treatment, but if you're looking for this on CD, snag it. You know, it's certainly worth it. It's literally ripping technical death thrash stuff with a lot of interesting time changes, a lot of crazy drumming, very, very cool switch ups, surprises, that kind of stuff. Very influential band. Eric Rutan, which, if you know anything about these guys, you probably know. He was the guitarist, played in Morbid Angel, Hate Eternal, produced a lot of stuff. Big time producer for death metal. Great kind of mid-pitch, kind of almost vomitous kind of vocals over a lot of shifting riffs and drumming. Stuff that's technical like this is very hit or miss with me. Even the heavy hitters like Atheist and Cynic, I'm pretty later Pestilence, like third album era Pestilence and stuff. I'm pretty picky about it, and when it comes to stuff like Obscura, forget it, I'm not even interested. But this band, the technicality serves the songwriting, and they shit and get off the pot. I mean, all the songs are short. There's songs under 2 minutes on this, which is rad. Being, you know, a short attention span, hardcore punk kind of dude, it's great to have that. This whole thing is over and done with in about 35 minutes, and it's awesome. Classic. Then I got this Phlebotomized collection. This is the first 2 Phlebotomized records. In Immense Intense Suspense and Sky Contact. Another band, you know, I've pulled up their videos on YouTube. I know I downloaded their stuff like 12 years ago. This is actually the flipped around cover with the original album art that I'm showing off right here. This is the Redux version that kind of photoshops together, I think, both albums. If I can flip things around and have the original album art, I like to do that. This is the Sky Contact cover. Ugh. Actually, Sky Contact is a lot better than I expected it to be. Immense Intense Suspense is a fantastic record. Finland does it again. I mean, for as early as this was, I want to say 92 or 93, they're doing a lot with their music. It's kind of weird that they have so little recognition, I guess, because it's not that far of a distance apart from what Amorphous was doing during Tales of a Thousand Lakes. It's actually way more imaginative. There's a lot of synths and strings, or strings that sound like synths, I don't know, that capture sort of like an early Peaceville kind of vibe a little bit, but it's way more upbeat. There's gang choruses, great growled vocals where you can make out a word or two here or there, which is nice. Yeah, I mean, there's doomy elements, there's thrashy elements to it. And it's incredibly catchy. The riffs are perfect on it. It's just, again, Finland does it again, you know. Happy to finally have a copy of this, and I was just playing some video games and listening to Sky Contact, and Sky Contact isn't bad. It's definitely their answer to like a death and roll sort of thing that was probably going on at the time, I feel. It's got certain like 90s hard rock, almost kind of grunge radio sort of stuff going on, but still has growls. Still has the synths, but they're not quite as prevalent. I need to spend a little bit more time with it. It's cool. I just don't know what to make of it. It's definitely real Finnish and real fucking weird. Next up. So, Justin Stubbs was talking about this band, Year of Our Lord, a while ago, singing their praises. I hadn't listened to this band in forever. I loved The Frozen Divide, which was the EP they put out, and I think it was the first thing they put out. But this is a collected works dual CD thing. Another, got it for a song, very cheap, like $8, Amazon Prime, shipping included kind of deal. It's on Willow Tip. I wanted to revisit the full length, which is the first disc on here, because I remember really not liking it when it came out, and a lot of that I feel had to do with where my head was at the time. The full length was self-titled, just trying to remember that, looked it up. At the time it came out, I was living in Maine, and I was running a small distro, not a distro like that did mail order stuff, but just I brought a box of shit to shows. I bought stuff wholesale from Ebullition and other labels. And at that time, my tastes were changing, and I was starting to get more into the sort of like early 80s worshipping raw hardcore stuff that was blowing up in the DIY punk scene at the time. Especially bands like Nine Shocks Terror and Out Cold and Fucked Up, early Fucked Up, before they got kind of weird and indie. Shit like that. Last in Line from Western Mass. And my tastes in metal were kind of waning for a little bit. So I got the self-titled full-length for distro because I was like, oh yeah, Frozen Divide was awesome. I think Frozen Divide had come out a few years before, probably in 99 or so. I think the self-title came out in 2000 or 2001. And I remember being really disappointed because it dialed it back as far as the aggression goes. And going back and revisiting it, they do dial it back, but there's more space and more kind of breathing in the songwriting. Their music is melodic death metal. And it's true, they don't really sound directly like anyone else. I'm sure fans of Slaughter of the Soul, very, very early In Flames, stuff like that will like it. It does have sort of an American bent, and this is long before a lot of other American bands were taking that melodic death metal style and kind of mixing it with tough guy hardcore or whatever, you know, that kind of era of terrible metalcore. This is straight up melodic death metal. I think the people playing it were from more of a hardcore background, as far as I know. Not that it's really important, because the music's excellent. It's really good. The full length still doesn't quite grab me the way the EP does, but it is very catchy, very well paced. The EP's a little bit more black metal, like black metal along the lines of stuff like Dissection, you know, that kind of melodic style black metal. There's less of that in the full length, and a little bit more like spaced out songwriting. There's some really good clean vocals on it that, speaking of Amorphous, again, almost kind of remind me of the clean vocals on Tales of a Thousand Lakes, but I like it. I like it. Then we have Gorefest, Mind Loss. This is a collection that has the demos on CD 2, the Tangled in Gore and Horrors in a Retarded Mind demos. This is a Metal Mind release. It's always a label I hear weird things about. I feel like a lot of people have said they're one of those labels that's only semi-legit. There's a Polish label. That's a decent enough digipack gatefold thing. Got some flyers and stuff on it. This little booklet. It's got some, you know, some recollections of the band and that kind of thing. Gorefest are a band that's always been kind of second tier to me. I still like them. I have False on cassette as well. They were a band that I would always see ads for as a kid and be like, Gorefest, there's no way that can't be amazing. And I never really got into them that much until kind of more recent times. I had the Eindhoven Insanity live record when I was a kid and was really bored by it. You know, and it's oftentimes live records are a bad place to start. I feel like I remember the sound of that being rather muddy, but I haven't heard it since, I don't know, 1995 or 1994. I like Gorefest, but they're very basic, chunky meat and potato stew, fucking death metal. You know, you can hear the culmination of influences that was bringing forth what a lot of more, at the time, on the brutal side, kind of death metal was, you know. First couple of Carcass records. There's definitely a lot of second and third record bolt thrower all over this. It's got a lot of mid-pace stuff, but it does whip it into a frenzy on occasion. Growl vocals, relatively simple riffs. It's well put together, but I feel like if I discovered this record back in the day, it would be an all-time banger for me, but now it's kind of like a decent death metal record from the early 90s. You know, a little tiny bit of grind in there. You could tell they probably were into like some of that stench or crust stuff that was blowing up on Peaceville and the like during, you know, the late 80s and early 90s, Deviated Instinct and stuff like that. There's a lot of big, dumb riffs. A lot of it's pretty crushing. The vocals are really good. I feel like eventually these guys went in sort of socio-political kind of direction, but this is just straight up foul death metal type lyrics, you know, fetal carnage, confessions of a serial killer. Very, you know, aping Autopsy in that regard, which would be another band to name check when mentioning this. But, yeah, I mean, classic band, Dutch band, got a lot of good songs. Don't have anything super negative to say about it, but they're almost like, it's like a band like Benediction to me, where, yeah, they got some riffs, but there's something missing for me, for their stuff. But I like this better than False, which I'm even more kind of lukewarm on, but don't regret buying it anyway. So that's it. That's it for right now. For the first time in months, I don't think oh yeah, I do have actually a couple, I take that back. I do have a couple of things coming in the mail, but only like 2 things. And they're grails, and I'm really excited to show them off when they arrive. But we'll see when they arrive. I haven't gotten the shipping notification on eBay yet, so it might be a little while before I show off some pricey records, which I'm excited about. Yeah, that's it. I don't know. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Thank you for subscribing.